So I'm going to talk about facilitation skills as a role as a physician, what I call the push-pull continuum. So, pushing is more teaching, kind of that metaphor of filling people's heads up with information. You're kind of pushing the agenda, you're in control. You have an objective, there's something, an outcome you're particularly interested in meeting. Facilitation is more on the pull continuum, where there's less direction and you're trying to encourage the momentum to come from the person rather than you trying to control that agenda. Another way to look at it that might be helpful is if you look at push and pull as a continuum and you look at the skill sets associated, when you're pushing, you often find yourself telling people things or giving them instructions or giving them advice. I would argue that that's more in the teaching end of the spectrum. And then as a presenter, you may be making suggestions. This is some top tips of presenting. Offering some guidance, some models, some resources, summarizing some of the important information. That lends us a little bit more, now we're moving more towards the pull, but we're still kind of a blend between push and pull. Whereas facilitation is moving more towards pulling. So things that you're doing when you're facilitating are things like paraphrasing, listening, asking questions, being inquisitive, and provoking reflection. The process of facilitation taps into intrinsic motivations because people get to have some choice on how they take in that information. Another reason you want to use facilitation is to build some personal accountability. You notice that when someone gives you advice and it doesn't turn out, who's responsible? It's typically the person that gave you the advice. You blame them for giving you bad advice, right? That's more in the teaching mode. You taught me this is supposed to happen, it didn't happen. Versus facilitating learning and people start to see their own role and their own selves in that process. Facilitation allows people to naturally gravitate and leverage their own experiences when trying to learn something. Now, when humans think about something that's complex, we have to engage in a process called first divergent thinking to break through our patterns, because we all are habitual creatures of patterns. We like to do things in the same way because we like some sense of predictability. And if we're trying to get people to wrap their brains around something that is complex, we need to create a way for them to be able to expand their own thinking in order to build that engagement, that accountability, and those diverse perspectives. There's a twofold process. So the first job of the facilitator is to expand first. Let's surface all the great ideas out there. And then let's converge our thinking and narrow down to how do we get there to point B. What we typically do as facilitators is we want to jump to the convergence right away because we're comfortable with that. We're in a medical system where we want to come to the treatment, to the solution as quickly as possible. And what we often do as facilitators is we don't allow that period of divergent thinking to occur first before we start narrowing and coming down to concrete solutions. So as a facilitator, one of the things that you need, one of the challenges is how long do you spend in divergent thinking and then what point do you start converging the thinking to help people get to the point B. The things that you're doing as a facilitator is you're helping generate ideas. You're trying to get people to think about things. So yes, there's one approach we could take. I wonder if we could think outside the box and think of some other approaches we might take to deal with this issue. You'll see that encouraging open dialogue, having people feel safe to share their ideas and not be judged or criticized. And that's part of the facilitator's job, to create that safe environment. Seeking opinions. So a facilitator's job is to draw that out of people. If you know someone's quiet, your responsibility is, I notice you haven't said anything yet. Or someone is dominating the conversation. I notice that you've had a lot to say. I wonder if anyone else has anything else to contribute. And the key aspect, and this is tough, is suspending the need to make a judgment. Often brainstorming sessions don't pan out very well because we immediately start to censor and critique our ideas before we surface all the ideas. So your job is to help overcome that natural tendency for us to immediately want to restrict, to expand. And then when you're in the convergent mode of facilitating, then you're helping the people sort through, okay, you came up with this idea, great. What else, what of those ideas really stand out? Summarize the main points, try to get some consensus agreement around what idea is worth pursuing, and then you bring judgment back into the equation and decide which one will help us get to point B. Facilitation is inherently a messy process. That is what happens when you let go of control. That's why we love to teach, because we have some sense of control here. I know what I'm doing. When you facilitate, you never really quite know how it's going to go, which is a blessing and a curse. The curse is it may not go where you hoped it went. The blessing is maybe new things get surfaced that you didn't even think of. So Sam Kainer says, this is the issue, this is where facilitators are needed most in the groan zone. So your job as a facilitator is to go directly and address all the moaning and groaning and discomfort associated when we're trying to learn or adopt something new. How do you know when you're in the groan zone? So there's some telltale signs. So realize the groan zone is what we call it's that apex of extreme danger and opportunity. We see a lot of discomfort, but this is where potential lies. We know that our best thinking comes when we're in the groan zone. Often we go through life trying to run through it, trying to avoid it. But usually our best ideas come from this zone. And part of the discomfort is there's strong emotions. And I'm going to make the case that as a facilitator, one of the strongest techniques you have is to help people deal with those emotions, with that discomfort. And that discomfort often comes with uncertainty because by definition, it's complex. We don't really know what to do. So how do you move through the groan zone? So I'm going to give you two approaches, a two-pronged approach. Number one, focus on structural aspects of the facilitation. So there's safeguards you can place when facilitating that will actually support and help people through the groan zone. And I'll speak to these more in greater depth, but I'll talk about a check-in, talk about establishing some ground rules, addressing conflict when it arises, and I can tell you that Canadians rank #1 in the world for conflict avoidance. We'll do anything to squirm out of conflict. Right? So realize that's a cultural tendency that we have. And ensuring that the outcomes are action-oriented. So you'll see there's some structural things you can do. But also in balance of that, there's process things that you need to do. And process is, when I speak of process, I mean the way that you facilitate, the way that you engage with people will have a profound ability to help them move through the groan zone. So you see the active listening, asking good questions, ensuring complete participation, and constantly reinforcing and encouraging through positive, focusing on the positive, building on some of the things that were said this morning. So I'm going to spend some time touching upon these, and then we're going to get to practice some of them. The research shows very powerfully that if you need guidelines to help you navigate through that. And I use the metaphor, if you go sailing and you expect the weather to be sunny all the time and you don't bring any equipment or you don't have a plan of action, you get caught suddenly in the middle of the strait and a storm rolls in, that's conflict. What are you going to do? And if you go in naively thinking we're not going to have conflict, then you're setting yourself up that when it does happen, then it overtakes us and it derails the process. So going in expecting conflict. In fact, you want conflict. We know that conflict allows diversity of opinions to come out and flourish. We all think the same, then there's no need to actually work with each other or learn. Realize that being polite can get in our ways when it comes to thinking collectively and learning with each other. So your job as a facilitator, if you see things being too nice, it's your job to sort of cut through that. So as a facilitator, if you notice conflict, differing perspectives, The first thing that's really helpful, I find, is find mutual areas where there's agreement. Because again, our human brain, its tendency is to focus on what's different. Well, I don't agree with that. But there are often overlapping points of agreement. So as a facilitator, help focus the conversation on, all right, we don't agree on this aspect, but what aspects do we agree upon? And then we could build off. And using, you'll see listening skills, summarizing major points, bringing back where you've seen points of agreement as a facilitator is important. And encouraging people to build off each other's ideas rather than to see it as a competition. And again, test for false consensus. This is particularly important for Canadians. We'd rather jump to consensus and pretend we agree so we don't have to deal with the discomfort, the groaning of conflict. If there are differences, often just surface them. Okay, give me 3 major things you don't agree upon, and just list them so people get it off their chests. Then you switch over to what are things that we agree upon, and focus on 3. Try to get 3 things. And then from that, try to generate what are the 3 needs that underlie that. So the 3 things that are different, why are they different? What are the needs that are not being addressed? And those 3 things that are similar or common, what are the needs that they are addressing that we can agree upon? And you might find this is a great way to help people, direct people's thinking, moving away from the conflict as being personalized, and start to objectify it, and then maybe start to expand their thinking. Your ability to listen. I'll argue that that's one of your best tools as a facilitator. Out of all the tools you have, listening deeply. And this morning, Dr. Gupta nicely talked about mindful listening, because I think this is what really mindful or active listening is. It's not just hearing other people, it's the nonverbal information that's critical, and also the emotional component. To deeply listen requires you to listen beyond just the words, but go deeper into the emotional content. Active listening is actually being present, and you can't listen unless you're here in the moment. If you're drifting off, rehearsing something that you're going to say in the future, or rehashing something that was said in the past, then you no longer are in the moment. And the thing about listening is it's a skill. 75% of the capacity of your listening has been shown to be directly due to developing a skill. That's exactly what you're doing when you're listening, is you're providing that space for them to expand their thinking, and that's what you want to do as a facilitator. So thank you very much.